The silence in Arthur's house was a living thing. It wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a heavy presence that filled the empty armchair across from his, settled in the dust on the mantelpiece, and slept on the cold side of his bed. For 5 years, since Eleanor had left, the silence had been his most constant companion. Arthur, now 82, moved through his days in a predictable, muted rhythm. Toast and tea for breakfast, a slow walk to the corner shop for the newspaper, and long afternoons spent staring out at a garden that had grown as wild and untamed as his own grief. The roses Eleanor had planted were now thorny, sprawling beasts, their vibrant red a defiant memory of the life that once bloomed there. One Tuesday, a relentless drizzle kept him indoors. The gray light turned the familiar rooms of his small cottage into a landscape of shadows and memories. Drawn by an impulse he didn't understand, Arthur pulled down the rickety ladder to the attic. He hadn't been up there since before. The air in the attic was thick with the scent of old wood, forgotten paper, and time itself. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the grimy circular window. He navigated past stacks of old magazines and furniture draped in white sheets, ghosts of a shared past. In a far corner, under a pile of moth-eaten blankets, was a small, leather-bound trunk. Her trunk. His hands trembled as he unlatched the rusty clasps. Inside, nestled amongst faded photographs and letters tied with a silk ribbon, was a small, wooden music box. It was carved with intertwined vines and 2 small birds. He remembered the day he'd bought it for her, at a small market on their first anniversary. It had cost him nearly a week's wages, but her smile when she opened it had been worth a lifetime of riches. He lifted it carefully. The wood was smooth and cool beneath his fingertips. With a hesitant breath, he turned the small, brass key at the bottom. A delicate, tinkling melody began to play, a tune he hadn't heard in decades. It was Clair de Lune. Their song. And with the music, the silence was broken. The memories, held back for so long by the dam of his grief, came flooding back. He was 22, she was 20. A dance hall, stuffy with the smell of sweat and cheap perfume. He was clumsy, awkward, standing by the wall, while she was a whirlwind of life and laughter on the dance floor. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the noisy room faded away. He asked her to dance. She said yes. As they swayed clumsily to a slow tune, she hummed a little melody under her breath. Debussy, she whispered. It feels like dancing on moonlight. That was the night he fell in love. Their life together was a collection of simple, beautiful moments. They married a year later, with little money but an abundance of dreams. Their biggest dream was Paris. Eleanor had a tattered postcard of the Eiffel Tower pinned to the wall of their tiny kitchen. One day, Arthur, she'd say, her eyes shining. We'll have coffee at a cafe on the Champs-Élysées and we'll dance under the Eiffel Tower at midnight. Just like we're dancing on moonlight. They started a Paris fund, a large glass jar they kept on the dresser. Every spare coin, every saved shilling, went into the jar. It was their shared secret, their tangible promise of a future adventure. But life, as it often does, had other plans. First came the children, 2 beautiful daughters who filled their small house with noise and love. The Paris fund was emptied for prams and school uniforms. Then the roof started leaking. The jar was emptied again for repairs. Arthur's job at the factory was steady but never lucrative. Eleanor took up sewing to make ends meet. The years rolled by, each one filled with the quiet struggles and small joys of raising a family. The postcard of the Eiffel Tower grew faded and curled at the edges, but the dream never died. It became a gentle refrain in their lives. When the girls are grown, they'd say, when we retire. When they finally did retire, Arthur looked at Eleanor, her hair now the color of spun silver, her face a beautiful map of their years together, and he knew it was time. The Paris jar was brought out again, and they started filling it with a renewed sense of purpose. They were in their late 60s, but the dream made them feel young again. They bought guidebooks and practiced their terrible French, laughing until their sides ached. They were just a few £100 short of their goal when Eleanor started getting tired. At first, it was just a weariness they blamed on age. But the tiredness deepened, followed by a persistent cough. The diagnosis was a brutal, swift blow: lung cancer. The word hung in the air between them, heavier than any silence they had ever known. The Paris fund was emptied one last time, not for a dream trip, but for hospital bills, medications, and anything that might give them a little more time. Arthur cared for her with a devotion that was fierce and tender. He read to her, he held her hand, and he played the music box for her when she couldn't sleep. One evening, as the sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across her palliative bed in their living room, she turned to him. Her voice was a fragile whisper. "You'll still go, won't you, my love?" she asked. "I can't go without you, Ellie," he choked out, his heart breaking. She squeezed his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Yes, you will. You'll go for both of us. You'll have a coffee for me and you'll dance. You promise me, Arthur. Promise me you'll dance for us." He promised. It was the last promise he ever made her. She passed away 2 days later, holding his hand, as the first light of dawn painted the sky. After the funeral, Arthur had packed away her things, unable to bear the sight of them. The music box was the last thing he touched. He had wound it up, but the melody felt like a physical pain. He'd closed the lid mid-song, silencing it, and locked it away in the trunk. The unplayed melody became a symbol of his unfinished life with her. Now, in the dusty attic, the music box played the final notes of Clair de Lune and fell silent. Arthur sat there for a long time, the little box clutched in his hands, tears streaming freely down his face. He wasn't crying from just sadness anymore. He was crying for a love that was timeless, for a promise unkept, and for the years he had let slip by in a haze of grief. Eleanor's whispered words echoed in his mind. "Promise me you'll dance for us." A sudden, fierce resolve surged through him, a jolt of life in his tired old heart. He had spent 5 years drowning. It was time to swim. Downstairs, he wiped his eyes and sat at his old, slow computer. His fingers, stiff with arthritis, fumbled with the keys. He looked up flights. London to Paris. He looked at hotels near the Eiffel Tower. He pulled out his pension book and did the calculations. It would take almost everything he had saved. He didn't hesitate. He clicked, "Book now." A week later, Arthur stood in a small hotel room in Paris. From his window, he could see the Eiffel Tower, lit up and sparkling against the navy blue sky. It was more beautiful than any postcard. That evening, he put on his best suit, the one he'd worn to his daughter's wedding. He tucked the little wooden music box into his coat pocket. He walked to the Champ de Mars, the large park at the foot of the tower. It was late, and the crowds had thinned. The air was cool and crisp. He found a quiet spot on the grass, directly beneath the soaring, illuminated structure. He took a deep breath, the city lights reflecting in his watery eyes. He pulled out the music box and wound the key. The delicate notes of Clair de Lune tinkled into the Parisian night. Arthur stood up straight. He held out one hand, as if inviting a partner to dance. He closed his eyes, and in his mind, she was there. Young, beautiful, smiling, her dress swirling around her. He could almost feel her hand in his. And there, under the glittering Eiffel Tower, an 82-year-old man danced alone. He swayed gently to the phantom music, a slow, graceful waltz with a memory. A few passers-by stared, some smiled softly, others hurried on. But Arthur didn't see them. He was lost in his own world, a world where time had no meaning, where love transcended life and death. He was dancing on moonlight, just as they had always dreamed. He had kept his promise. It wasn't too late. It was right on time. The melody was no longer unplayed. It was a final, beautiful, heartbreaking performance for an audience of two.